Richard Sterling walked into the Lodge Steakhouse with an arrogant smirk. He placed his order in German, fully expecting to humiliate the waitress in front of everyone. But Valerie Miller was no ordinary server. She spoke 7 languages and held a secret that was about to turn everything on its head. The restaurant was bustling with activity that Friday night. Tables were packed, the clinking of silverware against plates, laughter mingling with animated conversations. Valerie Miller had been on her feet for 6 hours, moving gracefully between tables with her tray held high, smiling even as her feet burned like fire. She had learned to always smile, even when she didn't want to, even when customers treated her as if she were invisible. She was 28, but sometimes she felt she had lived twice that. Her pink uniform with a white apron was impeccable, as always. Her hair was pulled back in a perfect bun. Everything in its place, everything controlled, because that was the only thing she could control in her life. Her appearance, her professionalism, her mask of tranquility. The restaurant door opened and 3 men walked in. Valerie noticed them immediately. It was impossible not to. Expensive suits that screamed money, watches that probably cost more than everything she would earn in a year. They walked with that self-assuredness that only people accustomed to having doors open for them possess. The man in the center was the most imposing. Perfectly combed gray hair, a square jaw, broad shoulders. He had that air of authority that made heads turn as he passed. His eyes swept the room like a predator assessing his territory. Richard Sterling. Valerie didn't know his name yet, but she recognized the type. She had seen him hundreds of times at the Grand Continental Hotel, where she had worked for 4 years. Entrepreneurs, executives, men who measured their worth by the size of their bank account and the price of their shoes. Richard pointed to the center table, the most visible in the restaurant. It wasn't by chance. It never was with people like that. They wanted to be seen, admired, envied. Valerie finished serving table 6, went to the kitchen to drop off the order, and walked towards the 3 men. She took a deep breath. Another customer, another table, another night. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said with her best professional smile, opening her notepad. "Do you already know what you'd like to order, or do you need a few minutes?" Richard Sterling looked up at her. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, not with interest, but with disdain, like someone looking at an old piece of furniture in a second-hand store. Then he smiled, and Valerie felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that smile. It was the smile that came before something bad. "Brauchen Sie ein paar Minuten," Richard said in slow German, looking directly into her eyes. "Aber ich bezweifle, dass die Qualität hier unseren Standards entspricht." The 2 men chuckled. One of them, with glasses and a blue tie, added, also in German, "Wenigstens ist es billig, oder?" Valerie didn't blink, didn't change her expression. She simply kept her notepad open and waited as if she had heard nothing but insignificant noise, but she had understood every word. "We need a few minutes, but I doubt the quality here meets our standards." "At least it's cheap, isn't it?" Richard continued to stare at her. Waiting for her to ask him to repeat, waiting for her to blush, waiting for her to show she was lost, confused, humiliated. Valerie knew every word they had said. She had worked 4 years receiving tourists from all over the world at the Grand Continental Hotel. She learned German conversing with German businessmen at the lobby bar. She learned English with Americans complaining about everything. French with honeymooning couples. Italian with noisy families. Spanish was natural. Portuguese came easily. Japanese came little by little. Basic Mandarin Chinese too. She understood 7 languages, but they didn't know it, and she wasn't going to give them the pleasure of knowing it. Not yet. "I'll give you a few more minutes then," Valerie said in English, with the same calm, polite voice she used with all customers. "When you're ready, just call me over." She turned on her heel and walked away. She felt their gazes fixed on her back. She heard their muffled laughter. In the kitchen, her coworker Lucy waited with raised eyebrows. "Who are those guys?" she asked. "They look insufferable." "They are," Valerie replied, setting her notepad on the counter. "But only for tonight. Tomorrow, I won't remember them." It was a lie. She already knew she would remember them, because people like them left a mark. Not the kind that made you better, but the kind that reminded you how invisible you could be to some. 5 minutes later, she returned to the table. Richard Sterling was still speaking in German with his companions, gesticulating widely, laughing at something that probably wasn't funny. "Have you decided what you'd like to order?" Valerie asked, notepad in hand. Richard leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and looked at her with superiority. "Haben Sie etwas Gutes hier?" he asked slowly in German, almost spelling out each word. Valerie jotted something down in her notepad without looking at him. Was denkst du, Mort? Richard asked his companion in German. They must have at least one decent dish in this place. Schwer zu glauben, the other replied, chuckling softly. Hard to believe. Valerie finished writing in her notepad and looked up. I can suggest the sirloin with Malbec reduction. It's our most popular dish. Her voice remained firm, professional, as if nothing had happened. Richard ordered the sirloin. The other two did as well. She wrote everything down, confirmed their drinks, thanked them, and turned. As she walked away, she heard Richard speak louder, still in German. Leute wie Sie kommen nie aus diesen Orten heraus. Sie versuchen nicht einmal die Welt zu verstehen. People like her never get out of places like this. They don't even try to understand the world. Valerie gripped her notepad tighter, but she didn't stop. She didn't turn around, didn't give any sign. She passed the order to the kitchen, served 3 other tables, brought drinks, cleared plates, working as she always did, with efficiency, with discretion, but inside, something was simmering. Something that had been dormant for 6 months was awakening. 20 minutes later, she brought the plates, placing them carefully in front of each customer, without spilling anything. Enjoy your meal, she said. She was about to withdraw when Richard called her back. Miss. He didn't use her name, even though her name tag with Valerie was clearly visible on her chest. Just Miss. Bring me more water, and make sure it's cold this time. The water on the table was half full and cold. Valerie nodded. Of course. She went to get it. When she returned with the pitcher, Richard was talking with his colleagues about some business, alternating between English and Spanish. He took the pitcher from her hands without looking at her, without thanking her, and continued his conversation, as if she were part of the furniture. Valerie stood there for 2 seconds, 3, waiting for something, a thank you, a gesture, any minimal acknowledgement that she existed. Nothing came. She turned and left. But this time, as she passed the kitchen, the manager, Mike, stopped her. Are you okay? He asked softly. That table is bothering you. I'm fine, Valerie replied. Are you sure? Because that guy is being a complete jerk. I'm used to it, Mike. I've seen worse. And it was true. She had seen worse. But that didn't make it any easier. The shift continued. Richard and his colleagues finished eating, ordered dessert, had coffee. The whole time, they kept making comments in German about the place, about the food, about the caliber of people who worked in places like this. Valerie heard everything, memorized every word, but kept her face devoid of emotion. When they finally asked for the check, Richard handed over his credit card without looking at her. She brought the terminal, he swiped the card, signed the receipt, and left no tip. Then he stood up, adjusted his jacket, and looked at Valerie for the first time with real attention. Thank you, he said in English, but the tone was condescending, as if he were doing her a favor. You tried. The 3 walked out laughing. Valerie stood by the empty table, holding the tray with the dirty dishes. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from contained rage. Mike appeared beside her. What a jerk. Yes, but he'll be back. How do you know? Because people like him always come back. Valerie turned towards the kitchen. And when he comes back, it's going to be different. Because something had changed. Richard Sterling had crossed a line, and Valerie Miller was ready to act. Valerie arrived at her apartment that night with an exhausted body and a racing mind. The small 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building greeted her with its usual silence. Peeling paint, worn-out furniture, but it was hers. Or at least it would be once she finished paying the overdue rent. She dropped her bag on the frayed sofa and walked straight to the bathroom. She needed a shower. She needed the hot water to wash away the tension accumulated in her shoulders, the knot in her throat, the rage she had been suppressing for hours. Under the shower, she closed her eyes and let the water run over her face. Richard Sterling's words echoed in her head like an annoying refrain. People like her never get out of places like this. They don't even try to understand the world. Tears mingled with the water. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of frustration, because part of her feared he might be right, that she really would get stuck there, serving tables, invisible, forgotten. But another part of her, the part that had struggled for years to learn 7 languages without anyone's help, that part knew Richard Sterling was completely wrong. She stepped out of the shower, wrapped herself in an old towel, and sat on the edge of the bed. She picked up her cell phone and opened the German app she still had installed. It had been 3 months since she last opened it. The screen showed a max streak, 347 days, level C1. She ran her finger across the screen, remembering the sleepless nights studying, the embarrassing mistakes at the beginning, The satisfaction of finally understanding a full conversation without translation. She closed the app and lay back on the bed, staring at the stained ceiling. Her mind drifted back 4 years, to when things were different, when she was different. The Grand Continental Hotel was one of the most prestigious in the city. 5 stars, marble lobby, guests from all over the world. Valerie had started there at 24 as a night shift receptionist. She knew nothing about languages when she started, only English, and a high school Spanish that barely allowed her to say hola without stumbling. But the hotel never stopped. Germans arrived asking about tours. French complained about the air conditioning. Italians wanted restaurant recommendations. Japanese needed directions. Brazilians asked for information in Portuguese. And Valerie was always there at the counter, unable to say, "I don't know" or "I don't understand." So she started learning the hard way, on the job. She wrote down phrases she heard. She asked guests to teach her how to say this or that. She downloaded apps on her phone and studied during her lunch breaks. She watched YouTube videos at 3 a.m. when she couldn't sleep. She made mistakes constantly, mixed up words, conjugated verbs incorrectly, but she kept trying. A year later, she spoke fluent English, functional, German, basic French. Italian was coming along. Portuguese was natural due to its similarity to Spanish. She learned Japanese from an elderly couple who stayed at the hotel for 3 weeks and had the patience to teach her. Mandarin Chinese was the most difficult, but she achieved a basic conversational level. And nobody at the hotel had any idea what she had accomplished on her own. The managers adored her. "Valerie, she fixes everything," they'd say. "Send any guest to her." And they did. She became the go-to person when they had problems with foreign guests. But then the hotel closed. Economic crisis, accumulated debts. One morning, all employees were called in and given the news. 30 days to cease operations. After that, everyone was on their own. Valerie looked for jobs in other hotels. She sent her resume to dozens of places, but the city had few hotels of that caliber, and all of them were fully staffed. The answers were always the same. "We'll keep your resume on file. If a vacancy opens, we'll contact you. At this time, we don't have any positions available." Months passed. Money ran out. Rent was overdue. Electricity was cut twice. Valerie needed anything that would allow her to pay the bills. That's when she saw the ad for the Lodge Steakhouse. Server needed, experience not required, apply in person. She went the same day. The manager, Mike, looked at her and asked if she had customer service experience. She said yes. He hired her on the spot. He didn't ask about languages. He didn't ask about the hotel, didn't ask anything beyond the basics, and Valerie didn't mention it because she knew it wouldn't make a difference. Nobody spoke German or French in that restaurant. Nobody needed translation. The customers were locals, simple people who ordered daily specials and paid in cash. She was just another server, and that was fine. At least it paid the bills. But that night, after 6 months of serving tables without using any of what she had learned, Richard Sterling had walked into the restaurant and decided she was invisible, that she was stupid, that she understood nothing. And that hurt in a way Valerie didn't expect. She got out of bed and walked to the small window of her apartment. The city twinkled outside, lights blinking on distant buildings, people living their lives, people with important jobs, people who had never had to choose between paying the electricity or buying food. She picked up her phone again and opened the browser. She typed translator jobs, bilingual jobs, interpreter wanted. The same old results. The same companies, the same requirements. Minimum 5 years experience, university degree in languages, availability for international travel. Valerie had no university degree. She had learned everything on her own, in practice, at the hotel counter, making mistakes and correcting herself. But that didn't count for anyone. Papers mattered more than skills. She closed the browser and tossed the phone onto the bed. Tomorrow would be another day, another shift, other tables, other customers. And maybe, just maybe, Richard Sterling would come back, because people like him always came back. They liked an audience. They liked to feel superior. And if he came back, Valerie would be ready. She didn't know yet what exactly she would do, but she knew she wouldn't let the opportunity pass. Not again. She turned off the light and closed her eyes. Her tired body screamed for rest, but her mind kept racing, thinking, planning, imagining scenarios. And for the first time in 6 months, Valerie slept with something more than worry in her head. She slept with determination. The next 3 days passed slowly. Valerie worked on autopilot, serving tables, smiling at customers, carrying plates, collecting meager tips, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time the restaurant door opened, her heart accelerated slightly, expecting to see him walk in, hoping Richard Sterling would return. He didn't appear on Tuesday, nor on Wednesday. By Thursday, Valerie began to think that maybe he wouldn't come back after all. Maybe it had just been a bad night, and it was already forgotten. But Friday arrived, and with it, Richard Sterling. It was 2 p.m., lunchtime. The restaurant was packed as usual. Valerie was balancing 2 plates when she saw the door open. There he was. Richard Sterling entered alone this time. Impeccable gray suit, leather briefcase in hand, phone glued to his ear. He spoke loudly, gesticulated with his free hand, occupying the space as if it belonged to him. Valerie's heart quickened, but she didn't stop. She finished serving the table, collected empty plates from another, and returned to the counter. Mike was organizing orders. "That guy's back," he said softly, discreetly pointing towards Richard. "The jerk from the other day." "I know," Valerie replied. "Do you want someone else to serve him?" Valerie took a deep breath. "No, I'll take him." Mike frowned. "Are you sure?" "Completely." She picked up her notepad, adjusted her uniform, and walked towards the table. Richard had chosen the same one in the center. Of course, he was still on the phone when she arrived. He made broad gestures with his free hand. He was speaking in English with someone on the other end of the line. "Yes, I understand the concern. But we need to close this by Monday," he said impatiently. "No, that's not acceptable. Put more pressure on them." Valerie stood waiting. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Richard didn't look at her once. Finally, he hung up the phone and tossed it onto the table with force. Then he looked up, saw Valerie, and his face showed something akin to recognition. "Ah, you again," he said without greeting, without courtesy. "Bring the menu." Valerie opened her notepad. "You're already familiar with the menu, sir. Would you like me to suggest something, or do you prefer to choose?" Richard looked at her more closely this time, as if trying to decipher something that didn't make sense. "You have a good memory, huh? You remember customers?" "I remember the ones who come back," he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "Well, then you know I don't accept lukewarm food or slow service." He spoke slowly, as if explaining to a child. "Understood. Understood. Perfect." Richard opened his briefcase, took out some papers, and began reading them. "Bring me a well-done sirloin, rice, French fries, and sparkling water. Quick." Valerie wrote everything down. "Anything else?" "No." He didn't even look at her. He was already reading the documents, completely disconnected. She turned to leave, but before taking 2 steps, she heard his voice again, this time in German. "Dieser Ort ist noch traurig," he said. "Aber wenigstens ist das Essen billig." This place is still dismal, but at least the food is cheap. Valerie stopped. She felt blood rush to her face. Her hands gripped the notepad tightly. She could turn around. She could answer him. She could show him. She had understood every word, but she didn't. She took a deep breath, counted to 3, and kept walking. She passed the order to the kitchen, served 2 other tables, brought drinks, cleared plates, working automatically, but with her mind completely awake. Richard had returned, and he had returned alone, without his colleagues, without an audience to impress. That changed everything, because now Valerie had the perfect stage for her plan, a plan that had just fully formed in her mind. And when the time came, Richard Sterling would discover that he had underestimated the wrong person. 15 minutes later, Valerie returned to Richard's table with a steaming plate. She placed it in front of him carefully, ensuring everything was perfect. The sirloin was exactly as ordered, the potatoes golden and crispy, the rice fluffy. She had personally checked with the chef that everything was impeccable. "Enjoy your meal," she said with her professional voice, the same one she used with all customers. Richard cut a piece of meat without even looking at her, brought it to his mouth, chewed, and immediately made an exaggerated grimace of disapproval. He pushed the plate forward as if he had been served rotten food. "It's dry," he declared, finally looking at her with cold, accusatory eyes. "I asked for well done, not burned. Is it that hard to understand a simple order?" Valerie observed the plate carefully. The meat was perfect, juicy inside, seared outside, with that golden tone that indicated it was cooked to the exact point, exactly how a well-done sirloin should be. Any professional chef would be proud of that dish. "Would you like me to ask the chef to prepare another?" she asked, keeping her voice calm, not letting the irritation that was beginning to boil inside her show. "No, I don't have time to wait again." Richard cut another piece with abrupt movements, chewed with a sour face, and continued, "But next time, pay more attention to what I ask. It's not that complicated for someone in your position, is it? The condescending tone in his words was unmistakable, as if he were talking to someone with limited capabilities. "Yes, sir." Richard looked up at her slowly. His eyes scanned her from head to toe with that evaluating gaze he had used the first time, as if he were trying to solve a riddle that didn't really interest him, but momentarily entertained him. "Have you always been so subdued?" he asked, tilting his head slightly to one side. "Or is it just with me? Because I've known many servers, and they usually have more personality." Valerie felt something tighten in her chest. The words hit harder than she expected. Subdued, like a light that doesn't shine bright enough, like someone not worth noticing. But she kept her face completely neutral, not letting a single emotion escape her expression. "I don't understand the question, sir." Richard made a dismissive gesture with his hand, as if swatting an annoying fly buzzing around him. "Forget it. It doesn't matter. Just go and bring me more water, and make sure it's really cold this time." Valerie nodded slightly and turned to walk away. Her steps were measured, controlled, professional, but then she heard his voice again, in German, louder than before, with that tone of superiority that only comes from someone who believes they are completely safe from being understood. "Menschen wie Sie erreichen nie etwas im Leben," he said as he cut another piece of meat with deliberate movements. "Sie bleiben für immer am selben Ort gefangen. Kein Ehrgeiz, keine Träume, nur Durchschnittlichkeit. Es ist fast traurig, wenn man darüber nachdenkt. People like her never achieve anything in life. They remain trapped in the same place forever, without ambition, without dreams, just mediocrity. It's almost sad when you think about it." Valerie stopped dead in her tracks. Her feet were rooted to the floor as if they had grown roots. The words pierced her, like sharp, precise knives, designed to wound in the exact place where it hurt most. Not because of the cruelty itself, but because of the terrifying accuracy with which they touched her deepest fears. Because part of her, the part that woke up at 3 a.m. with a racing heart and anxiety clutching her chest, feared it might be true, that she really would get stuck there, serving tables until her feet could no longer support her, until her back gave out, until she became an invisible shadow to the world. Someone people looked at without truly seeing. But there was another part of her, the part that had studied until her eyes burned and the letters danced on her phone screen. The part that had memorized thousands of words in 7 different languages, without the help of teachers, without the help of expensive academies, without the help of anyone but her own brutal determination, the part that had transformed every free moment into a learning opportunity, every tourist into an involuntary teacher, every mistake into a lesson etched in her memory. That part knew with absolute certainty that Richard Sterling was completely wrong, and that part was about to speak. Valerie turned slowly, very slowly. Each movement was deliberate, controlled. She walked back towards the table with measured steps, aware that all the decisions of the last 4 years of her life had led her exactly to this moment. She stopped right next to Richard, to his right, close enough that he had to look up to see her, and waited. He sensed her presence, and looked up with evident irritation on his face. His eyebrows furrowed. "What do you want now? Didn't I tell you to bring water?" Valerie held her notepad with both hands, gripping it slightly. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with air, feeling her heart pound strongly, but steadily. It wasn't nervousness. It was anticipation. It was the moment when everything she had built alone, in silence, without recognition, would finally come to light. And then, with the perfect pronunciation she had practiced hundreds, thousands of times in front of her small bathroom mirror, with patient tourists in the hotel lobby, with YouTube videos playing over and over until dawn, with the crystal clear clarity of someone who completely masters the language and doesn't just mumble it, she said in German. "Das Fleisch ist genauso zubereitet, wie Sie es bestellt haben, mein Herr. Gut durchgebraten und die Qualität ist ausgezeichnet. The meat is prepared exactly as you ordered it, sir. Well done, as you requested. The quality is excellent." Richard's fork stopped in midair, suspended in a moment, frozen in time. His mouth opened slightly. He blinked once, twice, 3 times, his brain clearly trying to process what he had just heard, as if the words had been spoken in an alien language that shouldn't exist in this context, in this place, coming from the mouth of this person. The restaurant's noise continued around them, plates clanking in the kitchen, conversations at other tables, the sound of the espresso machine. But at that table, in that small space between Valerie and Richard, the silence was absolute, dense, charged with electricity. "What? What did you say?" he asked in English. His voice had lost all its previous arrogance. It sounded almost incredulous, as if he couldn't trust his own ears. Valerie repeated, still in German, without haste, without anger, without triumph, just with absolute clarity and a calm that contrasted dramatically with the expression of shock on Richards' face. Das Fleisch ist perfekt, gut durchgebraten, genau wie Sie es bestellt haben. Es gibt keinen Fehler. The meat is perfectly prepared, well done, exactly as you ordered it. There is no error. Richard dropped his fork. The sound of metal hitting the porcelain plate resonated louder than normal, echoing in the tense silence that had formed around them. He leaned back slowly in his chair, pulling away from her as if he needed physical distance to process what was happening. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: genuine surprise, deep confusion, disbelief, and then something akin to discomfort, mixed with a touch of what might be shame, although he was clearly struggling to admit that last feeling. Nearby tables had begun to notice that something unusual was happening. Conversations gradually faded, glances turned towards them, with barely disguised curiosity. Mike, from the counter, had stopped organizing orders and watched the scene with wide eyes, completely motionless. You speak German?" Richard asked in English. His voice had completely lost its authoritative and condescending tone. Now it sounded almost vulnerable. "Yes," Valerie simply replied in English. "Since when? Who taught you?" "Since I taught myself." There was a long, heavy pause. Richard stared at her, and Valerie could perfectly see the pieces fitting into his mind like a macabre puzzle. The memories of all the comments he had made in German, every sneer, every insult, every cruel word he had uttered, assuming her linguistic invisibility. All those words now took on a different weight, a retrospective shame that accumulated on his shoulders. Then he laughed, a short, harsh laugh, without genuine humor, laden with tension and something that might be incredulity, mixed with grudging respect. "So, then, you understood everything I said the other days? Everything? Every word?" "Yes," Valerie confirmed, without averting her eyes from his. "Every comment, every insult, every sneer, everything." Richard's face turned beet red, but it wasn't the red of embarrassment one would expect from someone who had just been caught in their pettiness. It was the red of rage, of indignation from someone who felt deceived, exposed, vulnerable. His hands clenched into fists on the table, knuckles whitening from the pressure. "And why the hell didn't you say anything before?" His voice rose in volume, attracting even more glances from the surrounding tables. "Why did you let me talk like that if you understood everything?" Valerie held his gaze firmly, without blinking, without retreating an inch from the anger that emanated from him like heat waves. "Because you never asked," she replied with a calm that contrasted dramatically with his agitation. "You simply assumed. You assumed I was ignorant. You assumed I wouldn't understand. You assumed you could say whatever you wanted without consequences. That was your choice, not mine." Silence fell upon the table again like a heavy blanket, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of initial shock. It was tense, charged, dangerous, the kind of silence that precedes storms. Some nearby tables had completely abandoned the pretense of not listening. Conversations had stopped entirely. Glances were openly directed towards them. Even the servers had paused their tasks, observing from afar with expressions that mixed curiosity and something akin to awe. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His posture was aggressive, defiant. When he spoke again, it was in German, and his voice had a tone of open challenge, as if he were testing whether she could truly hold a full conversation or if she had just memorized a few phrases. "Interessant. Also, die Kellnerin hat versteckte Tricks. Wie viele Sätze kannst du tatsächlich sagen? Oder hast du nur ein paar Phrasen auswendig gelernt, mich zu beeindrucken?" "Interesting. So the waitress has hidden tricks. How many sentences can you actually say? Or did you just memorize a few phrases to impress me?" Valerie responded without the slightest hesitation, also in German, with a fluency that made it clear she wasn't reciting rehearsed lines, but actively thinking in the language. "Das sind keine Tricks, Herr Sterling. Das sind Fähigkeiten, die ich über 4 Jahre entwickelt habe. Ich habe jeden Tag studiert, mit Hunderten von Menschen gesprochen, Fehler gemacht und aus ihnen gelernt. Was Sie Tricks nennen, ist das Ergebnis von Disziplin und harter Arbeit. Teaser are not tricks, Mr. Sterling. These are skills I developed over 4 years. I studied every day, spoke with hundreds of people, made mistakes, and learned from them. What you call tricks is the result of discipline and hard work." Richard's jaw tightened visibly. He stared at her for several seconds that seemed to stretch eternally. Then he laughed again, but this time, the sound was different. There was still incredulity, but there was also something else, something that might be respect, although he was clearly struggling to admit it openly. "Skills." He repeated the word slowly, savoring it. "Skills. How many languages do you speak then? 2? 3? 4? At most? Valerie looked him directly in the eyes. This was the moment she had worked for years without knowing it would come. The moment when all her effort, all her sacrifice, all those sleepless nights studying while others slept, would finally have a visible purpose. 7 languages fluently, she said in English, letting each word fall like a stone into calm water. And basic conversational, in an 8th. The laughter died completely in Richard's throat. His expression changed again. Now it was pure incredulity, mixed with something that dangerously resembled awe. He stared at her, his brain visibly trying to process this information that didn't fit any of the assumptions he had made about her. At the next table, a couple had completely stopped eating and watched the scene with their mouths slightly open. Mike, from the counter, held a tray in the air, completely paralyzed, like a statue. Lucy, her co-worker, had approached and watched with wide eyes. The entire restaurant seemed to have entered a kind of collective trance, everyone present aware that they were witnessing something extraordinary. 7 languages, Richard repeated, as if he needed to hear it again for his brain to begin accepting reality. 7 fluently, Valerie confirmed. 8, if we count basic Mandarin. But I prefer to be honest about my limitations in that last one. Which are the 7? The question came out almost as a whisper. All the previous arrogance had disappeared from his voice. English is my native language. Then German, French, Italian, Portuguese, and Japanese. As I mentioned, I can also hold basic conversations in Mandarin Chinese, but I don't consider myself fluent in that language. I still make too many grammatical errors, and my vocabulary is limited to everyday situations. Richard remained silent for what seemed like several minutes, but probably were only seconds. He took his glass of water with a slightly trembling hand, drank slowly, as if he needed time to think, and put it back on the table with exaggerated care. His eyes never left her, studying her as if he were seeing her for the first time as a real, complex, valuable person, and not as a restaurant accessory. "You're lying," he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. It was more a desperate hope than a real accusation. "I'm not lying, Mr. Sterling, but I understand your skepticism. It's an uncommon claim for someone in my current position. Prove it then." The challenge returned to his voice, but now it was mixed with genuine curiosity. "If you really speak all those languages, prove it right now." Valerie could have been offended by the challenge. She could have felt like she was being put to the test like a circus performer, doing tricks for the public's amusement. She could have turned on her heels and left him sitting there with his incredulity and wounded arrogance. It would have been completely justifiable. But she knew this was the moment, not just a moment, but the moment. The opportunity to prove once and for all that she was much more than he had imagined, much more than anyone in that restaurant imagined, much more than even she herself had allowed herself to believe during the last 6 months of serving tables and hiding her light under tons of insecurity and adverse circumstances. "How do you want me to prove it?" she asked, still in German, keeping her voice professional, but now with a touch of her own defiance. Richard took out his cell phone with quick, almost frantic movements. His fingers flew across the screen as he typed something. He turned the device towards her. A phrase in French shone on the screen. "La persévérance est la clé du succès, même dans les moments les plus sombres." "Read this," he commanded, though his tone had lost its authoritative edge and sounded more like a plea disguised as a command. Out loud, and translated. Valerie read without the slightest hesitation, with the Parisian accent she had perfected listening to countless French tourists. "La persévérance est la clé du succès, même dans les moments les plus sombres." Then she added in English, "Perseverance is the key to success, even in the darkest moments." Richard blinked. His fingers returned to the screen. This time he wrote something in Italian. "Il coraggio non è l'assenza di paura, ma la forza di andare avanti nonostante essa." Valerie read it immediately with the characteristic musicality of Italian. "Il coraggio non è l'assenza di paura, ma la forza di andare avanti nonostante essa." Then in English, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the strength to move forward despite it." Richard's hands trembled visibly now, as he typed the next sentence, Japanese this time. "Yuki to wa tamashi no tsuyosa de ari, gyakkyo ni tachimukau chikara de aru." Yuki to wa tamashi no tsuyosa de ari, gyakkyo ni tachimukau chikara de aru. Valerie pronounced it with the tonal precision that Japanese required. Yuki to wa tamashi no tsuyosa de ari, gyakkyo ni tachimukau chikara de aru. In English, courage is the strength of the soul and the power to face adversity. He tried Portuguese. "A verdadeira força está em nunca desistir dos seus sonhos." A verdadeira força está em nunca desistir dos seus sonhos. Valerie Reed. True strength lies in never giving up on your dreams. With each language Valerie mastered effortlessly, Richard's face transformed. Arrogance melted like wax under fire. Incredulity gave way to astonishment, and slowly, very slowly, something akin to respect began to appear in his eyes. Finally, he placed the phone gently on the table. He leaned back in his chair completely, as if all his energy had abandoned him. He stared at Valerie with a complex expression that mixed admiration, embarrassment, and something that might be remorse, although he was clearly not accustomed to feeling that particular emotion. The restaurant had fallen into complete silence. Not even the sounds of the kitchen could be heard. It was as if everyone present was collectively holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next in this unexpected drama. "My God," Richard finally murmured in English, running a hand through his perfectly combed hair, disheveling it for the first time. "It's true. It's all true." Valerie said nothing, simply waited, maintaining her professional posture, her serene face, although inside her heart beat like a war drum. "How?" Richard began, then stopped, searching for the right words. "How is it possible for a server to speak 7 languages? It makes no sense. None of this makes sense." And there it was, the question Valerie had been waiting for, the question that would give her the opportunity to tell her story, to show him who she really was, to make him understand the magnitude of the mistake he had made in judging her. "I wasn't a server before, Mr. Sterling," Valerie said, her voice firm, but charged with contained emotion. "I worked at the Grand Continental Hotel as a receptionist. I was there for 4 years. I learned these languages because I needed to do my job. I studied in every free moment, during my breaks, after work, on weekends. I learned from guests, from apps, from videos, from any resource I could find. And I'm here serving tables because I also need to, because the hotel closed, and because the jobs that require what I know also require university degrees that I don't have. Because life sometimes puts you in places you didn't choose, but that doesn't define who you are or what you can do." The silence that followed her words was deafening. Richard looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time as a complete, complex, valuable human being. "You're completely wasted here," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. And in that moment, Valerie knew her life was about to change forever. Richard sat in silence for several seconds that seemed to stretch into hours. Valerie could see his mind working, processing, recalculating everything he had assumed about her. Finally, he took his napkin, wiped his mouth with slow, deliberate movements, and stood up. The entire restaurant was still watching. No one was pretending not to pay attention anymore. It was as if everyone present was watching a movie and had reached the crucial moment where everything could change. Richard took his leather wallet from the inside pocket of his jacket. He opened it and extracted several bills, far more than necessary to pay the bill. He placed them on the table carefully, as if depositing something sacred. For the first time since he had started frequenting the restaurant, he left a tip. And it wasn't just any tip. It was generous. Excessively generous. "Valerie," he said, using her name for the first time. She felt a shiver at hearing it. Until that moment, she had been Miss, or simply an empty space that brought food. "That's your name, isn't it?" She nodded, discreetly pointing to the name tag she had worn on her chest since day one. "Yes, Mr. Sterling." "Richard," he corrected her. "Call me Richard. I think after what just happened, formalities are a bit ridiculous, don't you?" Valerie didn't answer. She wasn't sure she wanted that familiarity with someone who, just minutes ago, had been humiliating her in a language he thought she didn't understand. Richard put his wallet away, took his briefcase and documents from the table, smoothed his jacket with one hand, a nervous gesture. Valerie noticed. He, the man who had entered the restaurant with all the confidence in the world, now seemed uneasy, unsure how to proceed. "You should look for a better job," he finally said, looking her directly in the eyes. "Someone with your talent, with your skills, shouldn't be serving tables. It's a waste, a criminal waste." The words were kind, but Valerie felt a pang of irritation. It was easy for him to say that. Easy for someone who had clearly never had to worry about paying rent or deciding between buying food or paying for electricity. Easy for someone who didn't know what it was like to send hundreds of resumes and receive only silence or polite rejections. "Believe me, Mr. Richard," she corrected herself. "If there were a better job available, I'd already have it. I'm not here by choice. I'm here out of necessity." Richard nodded slowly, as if he was finally beginning to understand something fundamental about the world he had been ignoring his whole life. "I know. And I have something to propose to you." Valerie felt her heart quicken. A proposal? After all this, but not here, Richard continued, looking around the restaurant where dozens of eyes were still watching them. Not with all this audience. I'm coming back tomorrow, same time, and when I do, I want to talk to you calmly, without spectators, without pressure, just a conversation between two people. Does that sound good to you? Valerie didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to ask him right then what it was about. Another part, the cautious part that had learned not to trust too quickly, told her to wait, to listen, not to get too excited too soon. What is it about? She finally asked. Richard smiled. It wasn't the arrogant smile from before. It was something more genuine, more human. Tomorrow, I promise you. But I think it could be something that interests you, something that could use those incredible skills you've been hiding here. With that, he walked towards the exit, but when he reached the door, he stopped, turned slightly, and looked at her over his shoulder. And Valerie, I apologize for what I said, everything I said. I have no excuse. I was an arrogant jerk who made stupid assumptions. I'm genuinely sorry. And he walked out of the restaurant, leaving Valerie standing by the empty table, holding the bills in her trembling hand, feeling her heart beat so loudly she could hear it in her ears. The restaurant immediately erupted in murmurs. Conversations that had been suspended resumed with renewed intensity. But now, everyone was talking about one thing, what they had just witnessed. Mike practically ran towards her, his eyes shining with excitement. My God, Valerie, what just happened? You speak 7 languages? 7? His voice rose in volume with each word. And that guy is going to offer you a job? How did you never tell me you spoke so many languages? Lucy appeared on the other side, equally excited. That was incredible. You left him completely speechless. You should have seen his face when you started speaking German. I thought he was going to faint. Valerie looked at the bills in her hand. They were enough to pay her overdue bills, enough to buy decent food, enough to breathe a little easier for at least a couple of weeks. I don't know, Mike, she replied honestly. I don't know what just happened. I don't know if he's really coming back tomorrow or if this was just… I don't know what it was. He'll be back, Mike said with conviction. I saw how he looked at you when he left. That man is coming back, and I think your life is about to change, Valerie. The rest of the shift passed in a haze. Valerie served tables mechanically, her mind completely elsewhere. The other customers looked at her with new curiosity. Some even asked her questions about the languages she spoke. Others simply watched her with barely disguised admiration. When her shift finally ended and she changed in the small staff locker room, Valerie sat on the bench and let out a long, deep sigh she had been holding for hours. What had she done? Had she made the right decision by revealing her skills to Richard, or had she just made a monumental mistake? Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She took it out and saw a message from an unknown number. Valerie, it's Richard Sterling. Mike gave me your number. I hope you don't mind. I just wanted to confirm that I'll be there tomorrow at 2 p.m. Please give this conversation a chance. I believe we both have a lot to gain. And again, my apologies for my behavior. There's no excuse for how I treated you. RS. A few seconds later, a bank transfer notification arrived. Enough for the taxi and a little more. Valerie felt something tighten in her throat. No one had trusted her like that in a long time. She wrote back, "Okay, I'll be there. See you tomorrow." She sent the message before she could regret it. That night, Valerie couldn't sleep a minute. She lay awake in her bed, staring at the stained ceiling of her small apartment, her mind racing at 1,000 miles an hour. What could Richard Sterling want? Was this proposal real, or was he just playing with her? What if it was some kind of trap? What if he just wanted to humiliate her in a different way? But then she remembered the expression on his face when she had demonstrated her skills. It hadn't been mockery, it had been genuine astonishment. And that apology at the end had sounded sincere. She got out of bed at 5 a.m., unable to stay in bed any longer. She made herself a weak coffee with what little she had left. She sat by the window and watched the city slowly wake up under the still dark sky. Lights began to turn on in nearby buildings, people going to work, people living their normal lives, people who had no idea that in that small apartment, a woman was about to make a decision that could change everything. Valerie thought of her mother, who had died 5 years ago, without getting to see all her daughter had achieved. She thought of her father, who had disappeared from their lives when she was 10. She thought of all the times she had wanted to give up, when learning a new language seemed impossible, when words jumbled in her head and she wanted to throw her phone against the wall. But she hadn't given up. She had never given up, and she wasn't going to start now. She picked up her phone and opened her German app. The screen still showed a 3-4. 7-day streak completed, level C1. She smiled slightly. Maybe all that effort would finally have a greater purpose. She spent the day in a state of controlled anxiety. She showered. She got ready with more care than usual. She chose her best uniform, the one that had no visible stains or wear. She styled her hair with special attention, making sure every strand was in place. She arrived at the restaurant an hour before her shift. Mike greeted her with a huge smile. "Ready for your big moment?" "I don't know if I'm ready," Valerie admitted. "I don't even know what to expect." "Just listen to him. Listen to what he has to say, and then you decide." "But Valerie, don't let fear make you say no before you even know what he's offering you." She nodded, appreciating the advice, although her stomach was still in knots. 2 p.m. arrived with agonizing slowness. Valerie had been watching the door like a hawk, her heart leaping every time it opened, only to be disappointed when someone else walked in. And then, exactly at 2 o'clock, Richard Sterling entered through the door, but this time it was different. He wasn't talking on the phone. He wasn't gesticulating arrogantly. He wasn't walking as if he owned the place. He walked with measured steps, almost humbly. He wore the same kind of expensive suit, but something in his body language was completely different from when she had met him at the restaurant. There was less arrogance, more humanity. His eyes immediately sought out Valerie. When he found her, he smiled. It wasn't the condescending smile from before. It was warm, genuine, almost nervous. He walked directly towards her. "Hello, Valerie. Thank you for giving me this opportunity." "Hello, Richard," she replied, her voice firmer than she felt. "You said you had a proposal." "Yes. Can we sit down?" He pointed to a table in the corner, away from the main restaurant noise. "This will take a little time, and I want you to understand exactly what it's about." Valerie looked at Mike, who nodded, giving her permission. They went to the corner table and sat opposite each other. Richard placed his briefcase on the table, opened it, and took out a folder. But before opening it, he set it aside and looked directly at Valerie. "Before we talk business, I need to say something," he began. "Yesterday I left here completely ashamed, not just for being caught speaking ill of you, but for realizing how blind I had been. I made assumptions based on nothing more than prejudice and arrogance. I judged you by your current job without considering who you really were or what you had accomplished. And that says more about my own shortcomings as a person than about you." Valerie listened in silence. The words sounded sincere, but there was still a part of her that remained cautious. "I appreciate the apology," she finally said. "But you didn't come here just to apologize again, did you?" Richard smiled slightly. "No, you're right. I came here because I believe I can offer you something, and frankly, because I believe you can offer me something I desperately need." He opened the folder and took out some documents. "I have an international consulting firm, Sterling & Associates. We work with clients from all over the world, Europe, Asia, America. We help companies expand into new markets, establish operations in different countries, and navigate the complexities of doing business globally." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "The problem is that my executive assistant, the person who handled all my international communications, all my translations, all my coordination with foreign clients, resigned 3 weeks ago. She went to work for the competition, leaving me in a terrible position. I have meetings scheduled with Japanese, German, French clients. I have contracts that need to be translated. I have calls that need real-time interpretation. And until yesterday, I had absolutely no idea how I was going to solve this problem." He looked at Valerie with an intensity that made her feel both uncomfortable and intrigued. "And then I walked into this restaurant a week ago and found exactly what I needed, only I was too stupid and arrogant to realize it until you showed me in the most impactful way possible." Valerie felt her heart accelerate. "What exactly are you proposing?" Richard leaned forward. "I want to offer you the position of executive assistant at my firm. Starting salary of 3 times what you earn here. Full benefits. Your own office. And most importantly, the opportunity to use every one of those languages you've worked so hard to learn." Valerie gasped. She literally felt the air leave her lungs. 3 times? She could barely form the words. 3 times your current salary, Richard confirmed, plus performance-based bonuses. "But I need to be honest with you, Valerie. It's not an easy job. The hours can be long. Clients can be demanding. There will be occasional travel. There will be pressure. There will be times when you wonder if it's worth it." He paused significantly. "But there will also be growth, learning, opportunities, and finally you'll be doing something that truly leverages everything you're capable of." Valerie remained silent for several seconds, her mind racing at impossible speeds. 3 times her salary. That meant being able to pay her debts, being able to breathe, being able to live instead of just surviving. "Why me?" she finally asked. "You could hire someone with a university degree, someone with formal corporate experience. Why a server without any of those credentials?" Richard smiled. "Because yesterday I saw something that no university degree can teach. I saw someone who had the discipline to learn 7 languages on her own. I saw someone who maintained composure and professionalism even when being actively humiliated. I saw someone with an inner strength that cannot be learned in any business school. And honestly, Valerie, after working with dozens of assistants with impressive degrees and extensive experience, I can tell you that none of those things guarantee someone will be good at the job." He leaned back in his chair. "But there's a condition, a requirement before this is official." Valerie felt her stomach clench. "What?" "I need to see you in action, a real test. I have a crucial meeting with a Japanese client scheduled for this Friday. It's an important contract. If I lose it, my company is in serious trouble. I need you to come to that meeting, take notes of everything discussed, help me communicate effectively, and then provide me with a complete report of everything that was agreed upon." His eyes locked onto hers. "If you can do that, if you can demonstrate that you can truly handle the pressure of a real, high-level business meeting, then the job is yours." Contract signed that same day. "What do you say?" Valerie felt thousands of emotions battling inside her. Fear, excitement, doubt, hope. It was too good to be true. There had to be a trick, a trap, something. "What if I fail the test?" she asked softly. "Then nothing happens," Richard replied. "I thank you for your time. I pay you for the hours you invest preparing and attending the meeting. And we both move on with our lives. No hard feelings, no negative consequences." It sounded too good, too perfect. But Valerie thought about her 6-month serving tables. She thought about the bills she couldn't pay. She thought about all those languages she had learned that were rusting in her brain from lack of use. She thought about the Grand Continental Hotel and how she had loved that job before it closed. And she thought about the words Richard had said in German just the day before. People like her never achieve anything in life. She looked up and met his eyes directly. "I accept." The 3 days separating Valerie from the meeting with the Japanese clients were the most intense of her life. Richard had emailed her all the material she needed to study, information about the Japanese company, technical terms of the industry, the context of the contract they were negotiating, even recordings of previous conversations, so she could familiarize herself with the specific accents of the executives. Valerie didn't sleep more than 4 hours each night. After finishing her shifts at the restaurant because she couldn't afford to quit until she had something secure, she would arrive at her apartment and study until the letters danced before her eyes. She reviewed technical vocabulary in Japanese, practiced business phrases, memorized the names of the executives and their positions in the company. Mike had been incredibly supportive. He had given her the shortest shifts, the easiest tables, anything to give her more preparation time. "This is your chance," he had told her. "Don't waste it worrying about this place. We'll be fine without you." On Thursday night, Valerie was so nervous she could barely hold her coffee cup without it trembling. She had tried on 5 times the only formal suit she owned, bought secondhand years ago for job interviews that had never amounted to anything. It was a little tight, a little worn at the elbows, but it was the best she had. Her phone rang. It was a message from Richard. "Tomorrow at 10 a.m. at Sterling & Associates offices. Address: 123 Park Avenue, Suite 1200. Clients will arrive at 10:30. I'm sending you money for a taxi. I don't want you stressed by public transport. I trust you, RS." A few seconds later, a bank transfer notification arrived. Enough for the taxi and a little more. Valerie felt something tighten in her throat. No one had trusted her like that in a long time. She wrote back, "Thank you. I'll be there." Friday dawned with a gray sky that threatened rain. Valerie woke up at 6 a.m. after barely 2 hours of restless sleep. She showered with almost cold water because the building's water heater had decided to stop working precisely that day. She dressed carefully, checking every detail 3 times. She applied light makeup, just enough to look professional, but not too much. She pulled her hair into an elegant bun. At 9:15, she called a taxi. The driver was an older man who tried to make conversation, but Valerie could barely respond with monosyllables. Her mind was completely focused on what was to come. The Sterling & Associates building was impressive, glass and steel, modern, intimidating. The security guard directed her to the elevators after checking her name on a list. 12th floor. The doors opened, revealing an elegant reception. Marble floors, designer furniture, panoramic city views. A young, perfectly poised receptionist greeted her with a professional smile. "Valerie Miller?" "Yes, Mr. Sterling is expecting you." "This way, please." She led her down a hallway with offices on both sides, employees working on computers, talking on the phone in different languages. Valerie caught snippets of English, German, French. It was exactly the kind of environment she had dreamed of working in. The receptionist stopped in front of a frosted glass door with the name Richard Sterling, CEO, engraved in elegant letters. She knocked softly and opened it. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Miller has arrived." Richard stood by a large conference table, organizing documents. When he looked up, he smiled with genuine warmth. "Valerie? Excellent. You're early." "That's good." He wore an impeccable dark gray suit, a white shirt, a navy blue tie. He looked exactly like what he was, a successful businessman in his element, but something in his expression was different from when she had met him at the restaurant. There was less arrogance, more humanity. "Thank you for the opportunity," Valerie said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Thank you for accepting with such short notice," Richard replied, approaching her. "How do you feel?" "Nervous," she admitted honestly, "but prepared." Richard nodded appreciatively. "Honesty is good, much better than false confidence. Come, I'll show you where you'll be sitting." He guided her towards the conference table. It was dark, polished wood, surrounded by leather chairs. A closed laptop lay on one of the seats. "This will be your spot," Richard explained, pointing to the chair on his right. "The Japanese executives will sit across from us. There are three: Mr. Takahashi, who is the CEO, Miss Yamamoto, Director of Operations, and Mr. Sato, who is their legal advisor. I already sent you their photos and profiles by email." Valerie nodded. She had memorized them. "Your job is relatively simple in theory, but it requires absolute concentration in practice," Richard continued. "I need you to take notes of everything that is discussed. Every detail, every number, every condition they mention. I also need you to help me when there are communication barriers. My Japanese is basic, enough for greetings and courtesies, but not for complex technical negotiations." He paused, looking at her seriously. "And most importantly, after the meeting, I need a complete report in English. Clear, concise, omitting nothing relevant. That report will be the basis for the decisions I make about this contract. Do you understand the responsibility?" "I understand," Valerie replied, feeling the weight of his words. "Good. Now, do you have any questions before they arrive?" Valerie thought for a moment. "What is the main point of conflict in this negotiation? What worries you the most?" Richard seemed impressed by the question. "Smart. The price. They want to reduce the contract cost by 15%. I need to keep it at a maximum of a 10% reduction for the project to remain profitable. There are also concerns about delivery times. They want 6 months. I need 8. Those are the two critical points." Valerie nodded, memorizing the information. The office phone rang. Richard answered. "Yes, perfect. Thank you. Send them up." He hung up and looked at Valerie. "They're here. They're at reception. Breathe deeply. You can do this." Valerie closed her eyes for a second, inhaled deeply, and exhaled slowly. When she opened them again, her expression was one of professional calm. She was ready. The door opened, and the receptionist ushered in the 3 Japanese executives. Mr. Takahashi entered first. He was a man in his 60s, completely gray hair, metal-rimmed glasses, an impeccable black suit, exuding quiet authority. Behind him came Miss Yamamoto, in her mid-40s, with a navy blue skirt suit and a serious but not unpleasant expression. And finally, Mr. Sato, younger, perhaps 35, with a leather briefcase and a laptop under his arm. Richard stepped forward with a warm smile. "Takahashi-san, Yamamoto-san, Sato-san. Welcome. It is an honor to receive you." He gave a slight bow, the appropriate gesture of respect in Japanese culture. The executives returned the bow with precision calibrated to their respective hierarchical positions. Then Richard pointed to Valerie. "Allow me to introduce Miss Valerie Miller, my executive assistant. She will be assisting us during today's meeting." The 3 executives turned to Valerie. She bowed perfectly, not too deep, which would have been excessive for her position, but sufficiently respectful. "Hajime mashite. Watashi wa Valerie Miller desu. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu," she said in perfect Japanese. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I am Valerie Miller. Please be kind to me." The 3 executives blinked in surprise. "Mr. Takahashi smiled slightly, the first trace of warmth in his expression. Nihongo ga jouzu desu ne, he replied. You speak Japanese very well. Arigato gozaimasu. Mada mada benkyou chu desu, Valerie replied modestly. Thank you, I am still studying. The humble, culturally appropriate response seemed to win even more approval. Miss Yamamoto exchanged a look with Mr. Takahashi, clearly impressed. Richard watched the scene with an expression of barely contained relief. He hadn't expected Valerie to master even the cultural subtleties of Japanese interaction. Please, take a seat, Richard invited in English, pointing to the chairs around the table. Would you like tea or coffee before we begin? Ocha ga onegai shimasu, said Mr. Takahashi. If you have tea, please. Richard looked at Valerie, slightly lost. She immediately stood up. Of course. Green tea is fine? She asked in Japanese. Hai. Sorde keiko desu. Mr. Takahashi nodded. Yes, that will be fine. Valerie quickly exited and returned 2 minutes later with a tray prepared by the receptionist. Green tea for the 3 Japanese executives, coffee for Richard. She served it carefully, using both hands when handing each cup, another appropriate cultural detail. Once everyone was seated, the meeting formally began. Mr. Takahashi opened with introductory remarks in Japanese, speaking about the importance of the relationship between the 2 companies and his hope of reaching a mutually beneficial agreement. Valerie took quick notes on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Richard watched, trying to catch what he could, but clearly missing details. Then, Miss Yamamoto began to speak about the specific terms of the contract. She spoke fast, using complex technical terminology. Valerie saw Richard tense slightly. Excuse me, Valerie interrupted politely in Japanese. Could you please speak a little slower in the technical sections? I want to make sure I capture all the details correctly for Mr. Sterling. Miss Yamamoto nodded understandingly and reduced her speed. She continued explaining her company's concerns about the deadlines. After about 5 minutes, Valerie turned to Richard and summarized in English in a low voice. They are concerned about the delivery times. They believe 8 months is too long given the current market pace. They need the product ready in 6 months maximum to coordinate with their own launch in Japan. If it cannot be done in 6 months, they would have to look for another supplier. Richard nodded, processing the information. He responded in English, addressing the executives. I understand the concern about the timeline. May I explain why we need 8 months? Valerie translated into Japanese. The executives nodded, indicating he should continue. The meeting continued like this for almost 2 hours. A complex dance of negotiation where Valerie served as a bridge, not only linguistic but cultural, between both parties. She translated not just the words, but the intentions behind them. She softened expressions that might sound too direct or confrontational. She clarified misunderstandings before they became problems. There was a particularly tense moment when Mr. Sato, the legal advisor, raised objections about a specific clause of the contract. He spoke quickly, with evident frustration in his tone. Richard understood nothing and looked at Valerie with concern. She listened attentively until Sato finished, then turned to Richard. He has issues with the penalty clause for delays. He says the terms are too severe for their company and they need to be renegotiated. Specifically, he mentions that a 5% penalty for each week of delay could ruin them if any unexpected problem arises. He is asking for it to be reduced to 2% and for a 2-week grace period. Richard thought carefully. Ask him if they would be willing to accept 3% with a 1-week grace period. Valerie translated the counteroffer into Japanese. The 3 executives looked at each other, had a brief quiet consultation, and finally Mr. Takahashi nodded. Sore wa ukeiraremasu, he said. That is acceptable. And so it continued, point by point, objection by objection, compromise by compromise. Valerie never lost the thread, never got confused, never let anything important get lost in translation. Finally, after 2.5 hours, Mr. Takahashi leaned back in his chair and smiled. I believe we have reached an agreement that works for both parties. Everyone in the room visibly relaxed. When the Japanese executives left, Richard closed the office door and sank into his chair with a deep sigh. My God, Valerie, that was incredible. Valerie was still sitting in front of her laptop, reviewing her notes. Her heart was still racing from the adrenaline of the meeting. Really? She asked, not daring to completely believe it. I didn't make any mistakes? Richard laughed, running his hands through his hair. Mistake? Valerie, you just saved a $2 million contract. You didn't just translate. You mediated. You smoothed tensions. I didn't even notice. And that cultural detail with the tea and the bows. Takahashi-san was impressed from the first minute. He got up and walked to the window, looking at the city. I've worked with professional translators who charge fortunes, and none of them did what you did today. None of them understood the emotional context behind the words. None of them anticipated problems before they exploded. Valerie felt something warm expanding in her chest. Pride, recognition, validation. I still need to write the report, she said, turning her attention back to the laptop. Take your time. Use this office as long as you need. I have some calls to make, but I'll be close by. Richard left, leaving her alone. Valerie took a deep breath and began to write. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, transcribing everything she had caught. Every number, every condition, every concern expressed by both parties. 2 hours later, she had an 8-page document. Clear, organized, complete. She reviewed it 3 times before emailing it to Richard. Her phone vibrated immediately. It was a message from him. Come to my office, please. Valerie stood up, smoothed her skirt, and walked down the hallway. She knocked on the door. Come in. She entered. Richard was sitting behind his desk, reading the report on his computer. When he saw her, he pointed to the chair in front of him. Sit. She obeyed, suddenly feeling nervous. His expression was serious, impossible to read. Richard finished reading, closed the laptop, and looked directly at her. This report is perfect. Absolutely perfect. You captured things I didn't even notice during the meeting. You've included context, nuances, even the executive's facial expressions when we discuss certain points. He paused. Valerie, you passed the test with flying colors. The job is yours, if you still want it. Valerie's heart stopped. Then it began to beat so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Are you serious? Completely serious. Richard opened a drawer of his desk and took out a thick folder. This is your contract. Salary we discussed, full benefits, paid vacation, performance bonuses. Starts Monday. If you accept, you'll have your own office, your own computer, access to all our systems. He slid the folder towards her. Take the weekend to read it. But, Valerie, I want to be completely honest with you. This job won't be easy. There will be 1, 2-hour days. There will be difficult clients. There will be stress. But there will also be growth, opportunities, and finally, the recognition you deserve. Valerie took the folder with trembling hands, opened it, and saw her name on the first page, employment contract. Valerie Miller, executive assistant. Tears began to prick her eyes. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Richard replied with a smile. Say you're going to take this opportunity and that you're going to show the world what you're capable of. Valerie looked at him. This man, who a week ago had humiliated her in German, thinking she wouldn't understand. This man who had assumed she was just another server without ambitions or dreams, now looked at her with genuine respect, even admiration. There's something I need to tell you first, Valerie said softly. Richard leaned forward. I'm listening. When you walked into the restaurant that first time and spoke in German, it hurt me. Not just the words, but what they represented. All my life, people have underestimated me for my job, for my lack of a university degree, for my appearance, and every time it happens, it hurts a little more. She paused, organizing her thoughts. But it also taught me something. It taught me that I can't wait for others to see my worth. I have to show them. I have to stop hiding behind the fear of rejection and start fighting for what I deserve. She looked directly at Richard. So yes, I accept this job, but not because I need your approval or because I need someone to rescue me. I accept it because it's what I deserve, because I worked hard for years to reach this moment, and because I'm finally ready to stop being invisible. Richard smiled widely. That's exactly the attitude I need on my team. Welcome to Sterling and Associates, Valerie. He extended his hand. She shook it firmly. Thank you. I won't disappoint you, I know. Valerie stood up, put the contract in her bag, and headed for the door. But before leaving, she turned. Richard, one more thing. Yes? Never underestimate me or anyone else again. The next person you humiliate might have skills you don't even imagine, and you could lose something valuable simply by being arrogant. Richard nodded slowly. You are absolutely right. It's a lesson I won't forget. Valerie left the building and walked down the street with the contract clutched against her chest. The gray morning sky had cleared, and now the sun was shining brightly. The city seemed different, brighter, full of possibilities. She took out her phone and called Mike. Valerie, how did it go? I got the job, Mike. I got it. From the other end, she heard a shout of joy. I knew it! I knew you'd do it! When do you start? Monday. I need to talk to you about my resignation from the restaurant. Don't worry about it. Consider it resolved. Go. Celebrate. You deserve it. Valerie hung up and continued walking aimlessly, letting the reality of what had just happened completely wash over her. Her life had changed. In 1 week, everything had changed. And this time, she had been the one to make it happen. 6 months had passed since Valerie had first walked through the doors of Sterling and Associates as an employee. 6 months that felt like 6 years of growth compressed into half a year of absolute intensity. Her office was small, but her own. A window with a city view, a wooden desk, a state-of-the-art computer, and a plaque on the door that read, Valerie Miller, Senior Executive Assistant. The title had changed after the 3rd month, when Richard recognized that her work went far beyond the duties of a regular assistant. She coordinated international meetings, negotiated contracts, managed client relationships across 5 different continents. She had traveled to Tokyo twice, to Berlin once, to Paris for an important conference. Her apartment no longer had peeling paint or broken furniture. She had paid all her debts. She had started saving. She had even sent money to her aunt in the countryside, the only family she had left. But success had not been easy. Richard had been right about that. There had been 1 4-hour days, nights, where she stayed until 11 p.m., resolving last-minute crises, demanding clients who made her doubt herself, moments when imposter syndrome whispered in her ear that she didn't deserve to be there. But every time that voice appeared, Valerie remembered where she came from. She remembered the restaurant, she remembered the humiliations, she remembered the feeling of being invisible, and she used those memories as fuel to keep going. One Tuesday afternoon, Richard knocked on her office door. "Do you have a minute?" "Always," Valerie replied, saving the document she was working on. Richard entered and closed the door behind him. His expression was serious, which immediately put Valerie on alert. In 6 months, she had learned to read his expressions. This wasn't about routine work. "I need to talk to you about something important," he began, sitting in the chair opposite her desk. "Something that could change your position in the company." Valerie's heart quickened. "What's wrong?" Richard took a deep breath. "The company is growing faster than I anticipated. The contracts you've helped close, the relationships you've built with our international clients. We're expanding, and I need help managing it all." He paused, searching for the right words. "I want to open a completely new department, language services and cultural consulting, a department dedicated specifically to helping our clients navigate the complexities of doing business across cultural and linguistic borders." Valerie listened attentively, not knowing where this was going. "And I want you to lead it," Richard said finally. "As director of the department. Your own team, your own budget, complete autonomy to build it as you see fit." Valerie was speechless. She literally couldn't form a coherent answer. "Director?" she finally managed to say. "Richard, I don't even have a university degree." "You don't need one," he replied firmly. "You have something much more valuable, real experience, proven skills, and the trust of our most important clients. The Japanese specifically requested to work with you on future projects. The Germans were impressed with your handling of their cultural concerns. The French, well, you know how demanding they are, and they adore you." He leaned forward. "Valerie, for 6 months I've watched you do things that people with doctorates can't do. You've demonstrated leadership, emotional intelligence, adaptability. Those are the qualities that define a great director, not a piece of paper from a university." Valerie felt tears welling up in her eyes. This time, she didn't try to hold them back. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Say you're going to build this department and turn it into something extraordinary." Valerie thought about all the way she had come, from the hotel that closed, leaving her with nothing, to the restaurant, where she had served tables while her skills rusted, to that day when Richard Sterling walked in and humiliated her without knowing she understood every word. Everything had led to this moment. "Yes," she finally said, her voice firm despite the tears. "Yes, I accept." Richard smiled broadly. "Excellent. We start building the team next week. You have carte blanche to hire whoever you need." He stood up and walked towards the door, but before leaving he turned. "One more thing, Valerie. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry for not having said it before, but I'm truly proud of what you've achieved, not just here, but in your entire life. The discipline you had to learn 7 languages on your own. The strength to endure difficult moments without giving up. The dignity with which you handled my horrible behavior. Those things can't be taught. You either have them or you don't. And you have them." He left before Valerie could respond, leaving her alone with her thoughts and her tears. 3 months later, The language services and cultural consulting department was a reality. Valerie had hired 5 people, 2 translators, an international relations specialist, a project coordinator, and an administrative assistant. She had established protocols, created systems, developed training programs, but most importantly, she had changed the philosophy of how the company interacted with international clients. It was no longer just about translating words, it was about understanding contexts, respecting cultures, building true bridges between different worlds. The results spoke for themselves. International contracts had increased by 40%. Customer satisfaction was at an all-time high, and other companies had begun to ask if they could independently contract Valerie's department services. One Friday afternoon, while Valerie was reviewing reports for the week, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Valerie Miller? Yes. Who is this? This is Christine Davies from the Grand Continental Hotel. Valerie's heart skipped a beat. The hotel where everything had started. The hotel? I thought it had closed. It did, but it was bought by an investment group 6 months ago. We reopened last month with new management, and we're looking for a director of international relations. Your old manager gave me your name. He said you were the best employee he had ever had. Valerie felt a surge of emotions, nostalgia, gratitude, but also something else, the quiet certainty of where she belonged. It's an honor that you thought of me, she replied, but I'm currently very happy where I am. I run my own department here, and we're building something special. There was a pause on the other end. I understand. Congratulations on your success, Valerie. You clearly took the right path. When she hung up, Valerie leaned back in her chair and smiled. The hotel had been important. It had been where she learned everything. But she no longer needed to go back there. She had built something new, something her own, something better. 2 weeks later, Richard organized a celebration at the office. 9 months since Valerie had started, 6 months since she had opened her department. It was time to celebrate the company's growth. The conference room was full. The entire team, about 30 employees now, chatted animatedly with glasses in hand. Richard called for attention by tapping his glass with a knife. I want to thank all of you for your incredible work this year, he began. We've grown in ways I never imagined possible, but I want to specifically highlight someone whose contribution has been transformative. He looked directly at Valerie. 9 months ago, I met Valerie Miller under circumstances that were less than ideal. I made the mistake of judging her by her position at the time instead of seeing who she truly was. And I almost lost the opportunity to work with one of the most talented people I've ever met. He walked towards where she was standing. Valerie not only saved crucial contracts, not only opened new markets for us, she changed the culture of this company. She taught us to value talent, no matter where it comes from. She showed us that real skills matter more than paper degrees, and she personally taught me a lesson in humility that I will never forget. He raised his glass. To Valerie Miller for not giving up when everything seemed impossible, for having the strength to show her worth when others underestimated her, and for building something extraordinary from scratch. Everyone raised their glasses. Applause filled the room. Valerie felt tears running down her cheeks, but this time she didn't care. They were tears of pure happiness, of accomplishment, of knowing that she was finally exactly where she was meant to be. That night, Valerie walked alone through the city streets. She ended up, almost without realizing it, in front of the Lodge Steakhouse. The lights were on. Through the window, she could see the full tables, the servers moving with trays, the normal life of the place continuing as always. Mike came out for a cigarette and saw her standing there. "Valerie," he shouted with joy, putting out his cigarette and running towards her. "What are you doing here? Coming to visit us finally?" She hugged him. "I was just passing by. Wanted to see the place." Mike looked at her with bright eyes. "We're so proud of you. The whole team talks about you. I tell your story to the new employees. I tell them, a server who spoke 7 languages worked here. Now she's the director of her own department at a major company. It inspires them." Valerie felt a lump in her throat. "This place was important to me, Mike. It kept me afloat when I thought I would sink. And you showed us that there are no small jobs, only small people," Mike replied. "You were the best server we ever had. Not because you were fast or efficient, but because you never let the job define you. You always knew you were more than this." They stood in silence for a moment, looking at the restaurant. "You know what's ironic?" Valerie said finally. "If Richard Sterling hadn't walked in here being an arrogant jerk that day, I'd probably still be serving tables. His humiliation was the spark I needed to stop hiding." Mike chuckled. "Sometimes the worst people teach us the best lessons." "Yes. But he changed too. He learned not to judge, and that's more than most people achieve." They said goodbye with another hug. Valerie continued walking, this time heading towards her apartment. Her beautiful apartment, in a safe neighborhood, with new furniture and a beautiful view. When she got home, she made herself some tea and sat by the window. She took out her phone and opened her language apps. The notifications showed streaks of over 500 days on 3 of them. She had never stopped studying, even after getting her dream job. She opened a new notebook and began to write. She didn't know exactly what. She just knew she needed to capture this moment, this feeling, this truth she had learned. She wrote, "Life owes you nothing, but you owe everything to yourself. You owe yourself the effort, the discipline, the faith in your own abilities, even when no one else believes. You owe yourself to get up every time you fall. You must not accept being invisible just because others don't see you. I have learned that external recognition is wonderful, but internal validation is essential. That degrees matter less than real skills. That humility and confidence can coexist. That you can be kind without being weak, strong without being cruel. I also learned that people can change, that the humiliator can become humble, that those who despise you today can be your greatest ally tomorrow, and that forgiving is not forgetting, but releasing the weight to be able to fly higher. My name is Valerie Miller. A year ago, I was invisible. Today, I lead a team. Tomorrow, I will build something even bigger. Not because someone gave it to me, but because I earned it. Word by word, language by language, tier by tier, victory by victory. And if I could, anyone can. You just need to believe that you are more than your current circumstances, that the place you are today does not define the place you will be tomorrow, and that sometimes the greatest revenge against those who underestimate you is not to prove them wrong, but to prove to yourself that you were always right about your own worth. She closed the notebook and looked out the window at the city that glittered with thousands of lights. Each light represented a story, a dream, a person fighting for something. And among all those lights, Valerie Miller finally shone with her own light.